over to Kyle.
Thank you so much, Devin. I'm really happy to be here. Like Devin said, my name is Kyle Dellinger. I use he, him pronouns. I'd like to thank you all very much for choosing to attend this presentation. It's more of a presentation than a webinar, really. Coming to you from Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I'm the digital pedagogy and open education librarian at the Z. Smith Reynolds Library, and I'm really excited to be talking with you today. I want to start by acknowledging that we kind of live in heavy times. It's unfortunately both a gross understatement and a cliche for opening a presentation. I want to acknowledge that it's easy to feel helpless, and I make no claims to have any sort of answer for these massive problems that we're experiencing. I do want to share, though, that to cope with my own personal anxieties, I have, like many other people, taken to gardening as a way to center myself and exert some small positive influence in the world. When we moved to our current house in the height of the pandemic, my wife and I set out to convert our suburban lot into a place that might one day be able to grow food and support wildlife. After a few years of careful attention and really hard work, where there was once only heavy, red, compacted North Carolina clay, we're now starting to see rich, beautiful soil. Our garden produces more abundantly each year as the soil improves, and we're seeing more wildlife show up year over year. And let's pause here to clear something up. There's an important distinction to be made between dirt and soil. Maybe you already know this, but dirt is just eroded rocks and minerals, pretty much devoid of any biology. But if you get some organic material and microbes in that dirt, it starts to become the soil that allows seeds to take root and grow into plants that sustain animal life. And soil doesn't just happen, it's actually built. Whether it's built intentionally by humans spreading mulch and compost in their garden, or naturally and passively by fungi, microbes, and insects that convert the leaf matter in the forest to the humus that grows the forest, soil depends upon input from living organisms. Lately, building soil has become a metaphor for my approach to facilitating open projects with undergraduate students. And for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to try to wring every bit of meaning out of that metaphor that I possibly can. And I apologize in advance if I wind up sounding like this guy. Before I get too far into this, though, I want to say that while I don't quote any of them directly, you'll hear echoes throughout this talk of thinkers like Adrienne Murray Brown, Miles Horton, Wendell Berry, Maxine Green, Bell Hooks, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, and open educators like Amy Collier, Dave Cormier, Sarah Hale, Billy Meinke Lau, and many others whose ideas have significantly influenced my own and whose words are the compost that grew whatever weird fruit this talk produces. I'm really grateful to them for their work and their generosity. If you were to take a quick snapshot of higher education by looking at current headlines, you get a taste of higher ed's collective anxiety and its resistance to change. Its colossal distrust of students, its endless search for ready-made tech solutions, its doubling and tripling down on oppressive structures intended to preserve education as a scarce commodity. After decades of committing itself to a commercial model of education, higher ed has become kind of like modern industrial agriculture, maximizing revenue yields through scale, mechanization, extraction, and exploitation. Let's see how it applies industrial solutions to pedagogical problems. So grades, literally a product of the industrial food industry, they distort student motivation and do harm to their mental health while not actually being a very reliable way to measure student learning. Increasing volume by exploiting cheap and abundant faculty labor and offering massive lecture courses and sometimes predatory online degree programs. Assigning expensive commercial textbooks that exacerbate income inequality and drive food insecurity while providing questionable value to students when compared to OER and other free-to-access materials. Licensing learning management systems, homework platforms, and other systems that grease the gears of surveillance capitalism and, as we saw with the recent PowerSchool breach, put student data at risk. And embracing academic surveillance technologies like remote proctoring systems and plagiarism detection software that offer the false promise of preserving academic integrity while violating student privacy, profiting off of student data, and reinforcing in instructors the idea that students cannot be trusted. So many of these solutions are evidence that we've become caught up in a technological arms race to keep ahead of anything that threatens to undermine the value of a college degree, such as cheating. It seems to be increasingly rare that institutions seek first to address pedagogical problems with pedagogical solutions. After all, pedagogy is messy business, right? Far easier, the many tech firms clamoring for higher ed market share would say, to purchase our ready-made tech solution. Inevitably, though, students will find a way around these barriers, requiring new and more powerful tech. This cheating industrial complex is only poised to intensify as generative AI tools become more accessible and more capable. Industrial scale higher ed sends the message to students that the goal is to earn a degree by any means necessary. It's an exercise in jumping through the right hoops and getting the right grades in order to get a good job. We've been sending them the message that real knowledge is locked behind paywalls, that their own knowledge is immaterial, and that in fact, they cannot be trusted to demonstrate their knowledge outside of a sanitized panopticon in which every mouse click is tracked and every paper is approved by an algorithm. For decades, we've been treating students like so many rows of corn on an industrial farm. As the heavy machinery of academia does all of the planting, the cultivating, and harvesting, it compacts the soil below, rendering it less capable of retaining water and making artificial irrigation increasingly necessary. We're intolerant of weeds and pests and other things that might decrease our yields, so we cover our crops in all manner of poisons, killing not only the weeds and pests, but also the pollinators and the microbes in the soil that make nutrients available to plants. Having poisoned and killed the soil, we must apply synthetic fertilizers to feed our crops. Now the only crops that can survive in this soil are those which we've specifically engineered to eat poison. But students aren't corn, of course. Students have agency. When they realize that to earn a degree is to endure a diet of poison, is it any wonder that they seek shortcuts? The goal that we've implicitly set for them isn't to learn, but to get a degree as efficiently as possible. Is it not reasonable then that students might turn to buying a paper online or having ChatGPT do their assignment for them? If the message we implicitly send to students is that we're not going to trust them from the jump, is it any wonder that they don't feel obligated to uphold their end of the social contract? And I know I'm speaking in generalities and with quite a bit of hyperbole here, and I promise this won't all be a manifesto. There are certainly institutions that are actively working against the industrial model of education, and there are, of course, many faculty and administrators who are committed to cultivating student learning in authentic and meaningful ways. Plenty of faculty have done away with surveillance tech and grades and actively cultivate an environment of trust in their classrooms. Regardless, I think that we could all see how the industrial model of education is pretty broken and how it's playing out in undesirable ways. So I want to see what you're thinking. Take a minute to brainstorm other examples of how the industrial education system is playing out. Got a poll everywhere here. Just type that into your browser, or Devin, if you could put a link in the chat. I want to see what you're thinking. Thank you, Devin. Yeah, standardized testing, not so much relevant in higher ed, but definitely in K-12. The Carnegie unit. Yeah, you must spend X number of hours outside of class. Certification exams. Yeah, I could maybe understand certification exams. I want, surgeons to be certified, but surveillance models, test proctoring, shutting down dialogue. Digital badging. Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, treating specific skills or credentials as a commodity. Yeah, outsourcing learning modules that we buy from vendors. And I know there's a bunch of information literacy stuff out there that's sold by publishers. Not to say that that's bad, but we outsource quite a lot of our labor. And there's some discussion in the chat as well. For-profit online education, just degree focused, not student focused. All right, all very great. Thank you. Let's move on. So now I'm going to transition from manifesto into what I hope is a glimpse of a positive vision of education that does not poison and degrade the soil, but one that is self-sustaining and truly regenerative. I want to share how I see open education playing a central role in bringing this future to bear, using the principles of permaculture as a guide. I think that by applying these principles to our practice, open educators can help create educational environments that are not only more sustainable and equitable, but also more engaging, meaningful, and transformative for our students. Years ago, before I learned that it's basically just a colonizer's repackaging of indigenous knowledge, I was fascinated by the permaculture movement, but I remain fascinated by the wisdom it attempts to codify. For those who are unfamiliar, permaculture is an approach to design and land management that seeks to mimic the patterns of nature and build soil, restore ecosystems, and create abundance in the production of food, fuel, fiber, and other things for human use. Permaculture designers and practitioners are usually guided by a set of principles that emphasize creating closed-loop systems in the production, storage, consumption, and recycling of energy, food, and materials. While the movement has been rightly criticized for its tendency to appropriate indigenous knowledge and land management practices, and for the pseudoscience that some of its practitioners sometimes embrace, I found it extremely useful to use the permaculture principles as a lens through which I observe problems and design solutions, both in the garden and in the classroom. I'm going to focus on a few of these by David Holmgren, who, along with Bill Mollison, coined the term permaculture in the 70s and continues to be one of its more prominent thinkers. These principles are, I'm not going to read all of these, but observe and interact, take time to engage with nature to design solutions that suit your specific situation, catch and store energy, develop systems that collect resources at peak abundance for use in times of need, apply self-regulation and accept feedback, discourage inappropriate activity to ensure that systems can continue to function well, use and value renewable resources and services, so make the best use of nature's abundance to reduce our consumptive behavior and our dependence on non-renewable resources. Produce no waste. By valuing and making use of all the resources that are available to us, nothing goes to waste. Use small and slow solutions. Small and slow systems are easier to manage than big ones, making better use of local resources and producing more sustainable outcomes. So this is a whole list. You can read more about it if you like, but I don't want to go into all of these. But I do want to show how some of these principles apply to projects that I've worked on and how we might approach problem solving and design as open educators. So I want to focus first on the principle observe and interact. So take time to engage with nature to design solutions that suit your specific situation. This is maybe the most important principle, and everyone will say if you've got a problem, if you haven't observed and documented your observations, you haven't begun to solve the problem. So permaculture hates waste. It includes waste, that includes wasted labor. So if you've ever planted a shade plant in full sun or tried to grow plants that hate having wet roots next to a downspout, you know what it means to waste labor and probably money. Permaculture would have you observe your site for an entire year before even moving the first shovel of soil. Which areas get the most sun? Which are protected from wind? Which areas drain well and which tend to flood during storms? Without this knowledge gained through patience and observation, you'll probably wind up wasting effort and time and money. When I started at Wake Forest, I was intent on starting some kind of open educational resources initiative like those I'd seen at so many other institutions. The benefits of OER were so obvious to me: cost savings, more equitable outcomes, immediate access to course materials, sticking a finger in the eye of commercial publishers. So what's not to love? I wasted years of effort pitching OER to faculty, planning textbook replacement programs that never really got off the ground, and generally wondering if it was just a personal failure that none of my OER work was seeming to take root. What I'd failed to do was observe and truly understand my situation and my faculty. Unlike at many other institutions where with successful OER programs, at Wake Forest, students generally can afford to purchase their textbooks, and there's plenty of financial assistance available to those who cannot afford them. There was simply no affordability mandate at Wake Forest, so administrators had no reason to care about OER, and asking busy faculty to change their textbooks out of the goodness of their hearts just wasn't going to work. I knew the value of open materials beyond just affordability, but a textbook replacement program wasn't going to get very far. One thing that some of our faculty do care about, however, is empowering students to produce work that goes beyond a traditional essay, and I'll come back to that later. So observe and interact. Your specific environment matters, and one size does not fit all. The second principle is catch and store energy. Develop systems that collect resources at peak abundance for use in times of need. This is another principle that I find to be really applicable to this regenerative future. How can we collect resources and store them for later use? So think of all the water that hits your roof of your home during a typical rainstorm. On most homes, that water goes into the gutter, down the downspouts, and either into the yard or into the street, ultimately to local streams, rivers, or storm sewers. Here in Winston-Salem, a home with a roof of about 1,500 square feet could anticipate collecting over 3,500 gallons of rainwater per month, or about 43,000 gallons a year. What if we collected that water to irrigate our gardens during dry seasons rather than just letting it wash away? Even capturing a small percentage of it reduces the potential for harmful runoff, helps local watersheds, and saves you money. So what are the pedagogical energies we can store? Courseware is one obvious opportunity. Faculty are always producing teaching materials for their own classes. Helping faculty provide better access, broader access to those materials can be as simple as getting those materials out of the learning management system and onto the public web somewhere. Many faculty already do so on their own initiative and build course websites or public GitHub repositories. So seek those folks out on your own campus and engage them in conversations about open educational resources. I'm also thinking about the work that students produce, and you'll see clear applications to open pedagogy here. I think instead of letting student work be washed into the storm sewer, so to speak, what if we stored it for later use? Even something as simple as keeping a private class repository of previous students' projects, with their consent, of course, could be helpful for future students' understanding of the assignment. These materials could be used purely as examples, or they could be used as objects of study or critique. Nothing fancy required here. Doesn't even have to be online. It could just be a 3-ring binder or a folder shared with students online. It can be much more complicated than that, but it could be that simple. Obtain a yield is the next principle I want to talk about. Ensure that you're getting truly useful output from the work that you're doing. So in one of my first ever vegetable gardens, I tried to grow broccoli. I planted it way too late, and while it grew huge leaves, it never really flowered. After months of growing, my broccoli basically yielded a single little floret. It was really tasty with some ranch dressing, but given the space that it took up in my garden, it was definitely not worth it. We could apply this principle in determining what's actually worth it in our classes or in those that we support. After doing lots of reading on the ungrading movement, it became clear to me that traditional grades were getting in the way of students' learning. Grading, a practice that I had hated to begin with, had become even more of a joyless chore. It was all the more discouraging when students would ignore my sometimes extensive feedback and just look at the grade. In talking with other faculty at Wake Forest, I sensed that they too felt frustrated by grading. So I started a discussion group on Susan Bloom's book, Ungrading, through our teaching center, and about 20 faculty members had a chance to discuss alternatives. Very few of them felt that grading benefited their teaching in any significant way, and a number of them have since implemented ungrading strategies in their own classes. We've now achieved kind of a critical mass on campus, and we're engaged in a year-long faculty learning community focused on building a website of resources for Wake Forest instructors interested in exploring grading alternatives, and writing a white paper aiming to shift how Wake Forest as an institution thinks about grades. By ensuring that we're obtaining a yield, we should be constantly asking ourselves, is this worth it? Is this having the intended effect? Are my students benefiting from this? Or is this just a joyless slog done in the name of tradition? Use and value renewable resources and services. Make the best use of nature's abundance to reduce our consumptive behavior and our dependence on non-renewable resources. The application here is obvious. There's an ancient woodland management practice known as coppicing that is the perfect example of this principle. Basically, in coppicing, young trees are harvested at a very specific time in their growth, which stimulates them to send up fresh shoots from the remaining stump. This new growth can be left to grow for years and years for harvest later as firewood or lumber, or it can be harvested pretty quickly when it's still thin and pliable and woven into things like baskets or fences. Done properly and with patience, some trees can theoretically be coppiced indefinitely, providing an endless supply of fuel and building material. Here again, the applications to open pedagogy are pretty clear. Open pedagogy challenges students to make meaningful, valuable contributions of creativity or scholarship by producing openly licensed work that lives on the web. So I'm going to transition to some examples here. I'm going to share with you 2 projects that I've worked on. It's in open pedagogy that I see a number of these principles coming together. So some examples that I've worked on recently are 2 class projects, Gender and Sexuality and World History, and Domestic Knowledge. In each of these projects, students are challenged to make original contributions that not only demonstrate their knowledge, but actually make an important contribution to their areas of study. So closing the loop, their work feeds back into the course for future use by students and even future scholars. So I'm going to first show you gender and sexuality in world history. This is a project that I've been working on since 2019 with a faculty member in the history department. And basically, this faculty member wanted students to get hands-on experience with primary sources and applying some critical analytical and students had a great time doing that. And this is not anything super complicated. It's basically just thinking about what research papers students would have written, allowing them to do some peer editing and get that online. I'm using a platform here called PubPub. It's kind of a alternative to WordPress. I say, like, if WordPress was invented by some librarians, this is what PubPub would be it. It has really great affordances for things like citation. It's just a really incredible platform. Now they're transitioning their model into something a little bit different, so I wouldn't dive in to PubPub right now, but it has served us really well. So this is not super complicated, like I said. Each semester that this professor has been teaching this, we start a different volume, and this professor is assigning future students readings from previous volumes, both as examples of the kind of work that they will be doing, and also things that they can critique as a class. Now that we have enough in here, we're going to be spending time this semester looking at previous publications and categorizing them, applying some kind of controlled vocabulary, grouping them together by theme or topic, which will increase the value of this resource and make it easier for folks to engage in the future. So feel free to check that out. I'm going to put a link in the chat to that. Domestic knowledge is another one. This is a different faculty member in the history department. I actually discovered her efforts through it was written up in Smithsonian Magazine, where she had put together a Google site, and her students had contributed transcribed manuscript recipes from a 17th century recipe book. It was chaotic, the Google site was, and I knew that I could bring some structure to that project. So I reached out to her, and we kind of developed this really amazing project. So the goal of this was to get students engaging with manuscript recipe books. That's the area of this scholarship. And so what we did is we identified a book that would be fairly accessible for students to transcribe. We put it into this platform called Domestic Knowledge, or sorry, it's called From the Page, I'm sorry. It is a really wonderful crowdsourced transcription platform. So if you can edit a Wikipedia entry, you can transcribe on From the Page. So what we did is we uploaded this to From the Page, and let's see if I can get here. So you've got your facsimile image here. So students had to learn how to do some paleography work. They had to learn how to actually transcribe reliably. And this was a really incredible lesson that the professor was able to deliver with relative ease on this platform. So if you click transcribe, it goes into the edit window, basically. And all you need to do is just sign up for a free account to transcribe these things. I think free accounts also allow you to put just a limited number of pages on the platform. So if you wanted to do this with your own students, it's very doable. It's run by a husband and wife team who are just fantastic, and they're really great to work with. So I really encourage you to check out From the Page if you are just now hearing about it. But anyway, the students transcribed these recipes, and we were able to kind of like cut up the recipe book so that it's no longer just a static book. So we can mix and match all of these different recipes. We actually were able to import a lot of previous transcriptions from former classes, from previous classes. But something like this plum cake, you have the facsimile, the transcription, And this is now kind of a linkable, citable recipe that folks can point to. Students also did reflection essays. And one of the coolest things that they did in this project was recreate or attempt to recreate some of these 18th century recipes. A lot of them produced videos documenting the process. So poke around there and you'll find some really delightful and sometimes disastrous reproductions of these recipes. So it was just a tremendous learning experience for students. And now it is a public resource that gives other folks access to this really rich resource. So that is two of the projects that I think really embody some of those principles that I'm talking about. I would like to give us plenty of time for conversation. So kind of to conclude, I know I'm going a little fast here, but have you ever seen anyone go out and water trees in the forest? Have you ever seen anyone in the forest pulling weeds or spreading fertilizer? Of course not. Nature follows its patterns and cycles that it's established over millions of years. Organisms cycle and recycle nutrients. Soil captures and stores water. Everything lives in balance, not in competition. These processes are not just sustainable, but regenerative. So one last question before we wrap up and have some conversation. What do you think it will look like if we can truly enact regenerative education processes? So I've got another poll everywhere here. Oh, and I'm not even sharing that. There we go. Erica, thanks for your response in the chat. I don't know if you'd potentially like to unmute and say more about that. You don't have to, of course, but
Hi, this is Erica.
hey, Erica.
Hey, so what the origin of that comment is from Barbara Oakley's work on learning, and she talks about focused attention and diffuse attention. Focused attention is kind of what we're all used to doing, studying, trying to learn things, testing ourselves, so that we can perform well on a test, what have you. But that almost everyone needs the diffuse thinking as well, which is doesn't look like you're doing anything necessarily. It could look like you're not being very efficient because you're taking time to ponder and what might look like daydream. But to me, it kind of resonated with the way, like in nature, things go fallow, like during the winter, and they need to do that so that they can grow again in the spring and so that they can flourish in the summer. And that we don't really seem to take in nature, we call it the seasons. And with people, it might be cycles, but um, we don't really seem to give ourselves the grace of that sort of downtime. If we take downtime, we kind of get criticized for it, or it's not really recognized as something that is going to contribute to our creativity or to our scholarship in the future. So that it came from Barbara Oakley's idea about how we learn and what we need in order to be effective learners. But I kind of see it as sort of applying broadly to a lot of different things, including scholarship and pedagogy.
That is so well said. Thank you so much, Erica. The idea of allowing things to go fallow for a time is essential. Um, Forcing ourselves to just constantly churn out new stuff and always be on is definitely a recipe for exhaustion. And it's not going to result in positive growth. Right now, my garden is under some cover crop right now. It's not anything anyone could eat. Maybe some animals could eat it, but it's capturing, the sun's energy, storing it in the soil. It's feeding microbes. So it's not producing anything for me right now, but it's going to benefit me in the long run, me, but also the ecosystem in which my garden exists. Um, let's see, Kelly has some great things. Let's see. I, and if anyone would like to unmute and discuss, there's a lot to unpack here. I know this was kind of a personal memoir slash manifesto, but so I want to provide plenty of space for folks to chime in. I don't want to pretend that I have any answers, much less all of them. Um, yeah, training our students to tolerate constant stress, pervasive inequity, limited learning opportunities for the work environment. Yeah, it's that Dave Cormier is a writer and educator in Canada, and he's written about this, or can't remember where he wrote about it, but he's talked about artificial scarcity, and how the web kind of eliminates the need for us to enforce scarcity in our classes. You know, we're not bound by the four walls of a classroom anymore. But the system tends to reinforce that artificial scarcity to preserve the model. And I think that's right in line with what you're saying. And if you'd like to say more, please, by all means. Students are more willing to explore and engage. They're not afraid to fail, so they aren't afraid to try. Yeah, that's something I've experienced with ungrading. Um, I have, if you're unfamiliar with the ungrading movement, I encourage you to check it out. We at Wake Forest teach credit bearing classes. And so I had the privilege of being able to implement some of these practices into my own teaching. But I've also, like I said in the talk, used that experience as a way to engage with other faculty who I knew were similarly disaffected. And I'm really encouraged by the work that this working group is doing to put together some resources and bring more attention to grading alternatives. None of us want to say that it is the way forward, but it is much better than kind of the status quo. Ellen says, how are technical trade schools or community colleges doing to offer students a way to acquire applicable knowledge that can be translated into life and work? I don't know the answer to that. What do you think, Ellen, or others? Folks who have experience in technical trade schools or community colleges, how does this possibly align with your work?
May I say something?
Of course, please.
Hi, my name is Christy, and I'm from Wilkes Community College. I can't speak to the liberal arts, but for the technical aspects, our school participates in apprenticeships with local industries. And that works like a typical apprenticeship. The student gets paid for their learning and their work, but they also earn credit toward a degree. But I'm curious as to how we could use it in the liberal arts.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you have thoughts?
I really like the idea of the cookbook. Humanities classes, like Southern culture and Appalachian culture, have used similar strategies in the past. I would like to see it used on a wider context, though, in a World Civ or American history or something like that. I think that could
Yeah.
be not that project, but a similar project sounds interesting.
Yeah, and there's nothing better to specialize in than your local community. That is the unique value of your place. If you have your students somehow documenting what's happening in their community, or the history of their place, the history of the culture of the place. I love the example of cookbooks. That's a great one. I saw for sale recently on Facebook Marketplace. Somebody had like literally like 1,000 old church cookbooks, and I was really tempted to contact them and say, hey, can we just have those for the library? Like, I'd like to do something with them, but I came to my senses. But something like that, engaging with works that don't exist online that could benefit your local community would be a really great way to engage students in the process of some digital literacy skills, getting work online that wasn't previously online, making that work accessible to folks with disabilities. That's one thing I emphasize heavily in my own instruction. Like we're not going to do it if we cannot make the work accessible. It's not done perfectly by students, but I'm able to have conversations with them about, why formatted text headings matter for people who use screen reader software, why alt text on images matters. So bringing that work online from your local community, and making it not just more broadly accessible, but accessible to those with disabilities, be a really great inclusive practice. You could also engage with your students in improving what's already there. So if you have a campus website or something like that, it'd be really interesting to see student input on it. Like, is this website helpful? Where does it kind of fall down? And have them draft up something or draft a report or draft a letter to the president or the provost. See how they can affect change at their local institution. I think that's a great opportunity.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you.
Thank you.
But it also makes me wonder, we have a local history collection at our campus, and I'm wondering if that would be an appropriate place to begin a partnership with our humanities courses in transcribing or getting that content accessible online as part of teaching a local history course.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be a perfect partner in that work. I'm all about that. I hope you do it.
Thank you. I do too.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't ask for those cookbooks, Sonia. Maybe I could track them down. But yeah, there's really some great ideas there. You want to say more about that, Sonia?
Uh, sure. I have a previous life as an archivist. So when you said that, and having done some work on with cookbooks, they're they're fantastic. And because church cookbooks also tend to not have um, text outside of the recipes themselves, they're also in the public domain because you can't copyright a recipe, which then allows you to do so much engagement. But I mean, for environmental science, you could track changes in banana bread, the quantities. Yeah, sort of the brain just went all over the place. And I just thought it would be fantastic. It would also be to tie into the AI conversation as well. It's, you know, what kind of impact and bias would a cookbook from 1933 demonstrate to the large language model that would be training AI versus a cookbook from 2024? Even the way we write down quantities. So even that could be used to talk about the AI teaching.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love all of those. Like you just threw out a ton of, you sparked a ton of ideas in me. There's so many applications for this stuff, some of this stuff. I appreciate those examples. And yeah, I want to acknowledge the conversation happening in the chat around AI. I know some of you may have signed up for this talk thinking that it would be about generative AI. It was in the first line of the blurb or the abstract. Obviously, I didn't really touch on that very much, but I'd like to know if others have ideas about how regenerative practices can or do intersect with what's happening in the world of generative AI and libraries. Or maybe not.
I put in a link to the Utopian Seed Project. And what it is that it goes along your same metaphor with the gardening. But it is tailoring crops to the changing world that we live in. So climate control and creating seeds that will actually work in the area that you live, rather than shipping seeds from California to the East Coast and then expecting them to deliver the same sort of produce that our climate doesn't allow for. But you could also kind of switch that to students and to learners too, that we have to cultivate them in the climate control or the climate change that we've seen in our world in, materials and computers and technology and AI, and adapt to that too. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that resource. That's interesting.
When you were talking about that metaphor, I thought of the Utopian Seed Project, and that those are our seeds, our learners, the students that entrust us to kind of help them through the climate
Absolutely.
change that we're seeing. So, yeah.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with kind of your localized expertise. The practice of seed saving, if you were to identify your most productive tomato plant, for example, and save those seeds, assuming it was an heirloom variety, maybe that plant was more resistant to disease than the ones that were planted next to it, for example. And by saving those seeds, you can produce more resilient plants in the future that are more adapted to your climate or your local conditions. And so I can't remember which principle that would apply to, but I'm certain there is one that would apply to using local resources or prioritizing resources that plants or resources that are more suited to your environment.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to like the trade schools where we actually put students out into the workforce. I taught with the community college too, and the odds are that they're going to live in that area, so they need to learn what is expected of them from trade in that area, and how to navigate the systems that are local to them, rather than thinking more globally, but not having to necessarily work in that environment. So.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, Ava says in the chat that it's important to consider the serious environmental implications of AI, and I would agree with that. I have used it with students before and attempted to teach them, but then thought about, the message it sends in essentially requiring them to use a tool that's negatively affecting the environment that they're going to have to grow up in. There's a lot of ethical problems with that, but I don't want to tell you what you can and cannot do with AI. It's, a Wild West with that stuff. So I don't want to make this all about a conversation about AI, but you can't really ignore it. And I think I will say I'm encouraged by what I see as kind of an emerging tech resistance or tech abolition movement. If I recall, there's been maybe a couple of years since I've checked it out, but there was a resource called Ethical Ed Tech. Let me see if that's still a thing. Yeah, I think so. So yeah, it basically is a repository or a resource for sharing like alternatives to technology that might be predatory or harmful to students' privacy or whatever. I can't remember if this is exactly what I remember, but there is something out there, and there are folks who are really engaged in this space that are really passionate about it. So if that interests you, check that out as well. I think this could be a really great regenerative practice to use and prioritize and support technology that is more ethically aligned with the work of libraries, work that is open source or work that is free and protects students' privacy. That's a really great opportunity to engage in that space. Other thoughts? I haven't even really dived into the poll everywhere. So regenerative education might look like growing students' confidence and in turn, true agency to pursue interests and or resist. I love that. Slow librarianship. I didn't talk about that, but yeah, that's another interesting movement you might want to look into. I don't know who put that in there, but someone with more experience than I, who knows about slow librarianship, feel free to unmute. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. empowering students to challenge themselves, and in turn, faculty instructors being present in the classroom, interested in fostering, encouraging growth in students. Yeah, removing that kind of grade or credential incentive, or in as much as one is able to do that, shifts the motivation for students and allows them to take risks. Thank you for that link, Brittany. Yeah, Meredith Farkas is a person I followed for a while. She writes about slow librarianship. Thank you. So check that one out. And Brittany, if you'd like to say anything, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything in particular to add other than I just feel like one of the things that we've focused on a lot in this conversation is the idea of like doing things in ways that are slow and in relationship with our communities and with others, that I feel like fits super well with the kind of ethos of slow librarianship. I think that is a very regenerative model of relationship building in the context of librarians working with students and faculty.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Or communities of practice rather than silos. Oh man, there's no such thing as silos in academia. Students seeing themselves as knowledge creators versus consumers. Yes, this is a big part. You know, that connects to the framework for information literacy, but empowering them to produce knowledge and getting them in that mindset that we are not acting as students, we're acting as historians. We're entry-level historians or entry-level biologists or whatever, but we're doing the work of a biologist and participating in a scholarly conversation that elevates it to a level beyond just writing a paper or a lab report. Not to say that those things are not valuable exercises, but getting that work online out in the public changes things for students. And I've seen it time and time again. One thing I didn't mention with doing work in the public with students, so asking students to do public-facing work, such as publishing on a website or something like that, carries with it inherent risks to their privacy. So I always talk to students about this when I am facilitating such a project. I give them the option to use a pseudonym or not use a name at all, or participate in some other way entirely. I do not want to be complicit in students being harassed online or stalked or whatever. So those are very real risks, and I'm very upfront about those with students. And those students that have concerns work things out with their instructor, and we've never had a single problem. And in fact, I've had students that have reached out to me after graduation and said, hey, that essay I produced in that biology class, I'm applying for a job. Could I go back and like revise that a little bit? I was like, absolutely, it's yours. You have the copyright to it. It's, I'll just, publish the edits when you're done. So students are starting to connect to this idea that these are part of their digital footprint, and that could be really great for them. It's showing that they've done scholarly work, potentially in an area of their future interest. So yeah, seeing themselves as knowledge creators versus consumers, and same to the faculty for certain. Okay, interesting. Yeah, this idea of outsourcing to vendors, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. Capacity is a huge issue, and some of these resources that we outsource to are necessary to do even basic things in our libraries. So I would, not say that, those resources from vendors are unilaterally bad. But, if you have the option or enjoy the privilege to have the capacity to produce resources on your own or reuse resources that others have produced, I think that's a more regenerative practice than immediately going to the vendor supplied product. All right, any last thoughts? I'm gonna kind of wrap things up here. This has been a really great conversation. And I'd love to connect with those of you who might have additional thoughts or want to continue this conversation in some other way. But with that, I will, let's see. Oh, we already did that conversation. So anyway, I want to say thank you all so much for coming. So much food, crops for thought. Yes, thank you. That's what I was hoping for. please reach out. You can find me on the internet. Google my name, Kyle Denlinger.
Kyle, is it okay if we include your campus email in the follow-up?
Thanks, Sam. Say hi to Stephanie Bennett for me. Thanks, everyone.
I'm loving the metaphor. I feel like it provided great grounding for this session.
I tortured that
Kyle,
metaphor to death, but
yeah. Thank you so much, Kyle. Folks, keep an eye out in your inboxes tomorrow for the slides, the recording, and a feedback survey. If you'd like more talks like this, let us know. I feel like I've saved a lot from the chat, so I'll include that as resources in a list in the email. But this, as folks have pointed out, has given us a lot of food for thought this afternoon. So thank you all so much.